This is going to be a panel that is different than the others because we're talking about the marketplace and things, the products and services that are out there that focus on AI. Before we get started, though, I have a housekeeping note. If there's a Kathleen Burke in the room, let us know. We may have some of your things, so please come and see us at the desk out front. But with that, I will turn it over to Mark Gray. Mark, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Katie. Hi, everyone. Our next panel discussion is on consumer AI and AI in the consumer marketplace. Joining us today are three esteemed speakers. We have, starting with my left, Julie Babayan from Adobe. Julie is a senior manager of public policy at Adobe, and she focuses on global technology policy and issues such as artificial intelligence and intellectual property. To her left is Vanessa Bailey. Vanessa is the global director of IP policy for Intel. She previously worked for the law firm Jones Day and spent 12 years at Nokia doing licensing, FRAND, patent litigation, and a bunch of other cool stuff. And then last but not least is Melody Hansen. Melody is an IP partner at O'Melveny & Myers, and she's the chair of the firm's Automated and Connected Vehicles Group. And so just, I guess on a logistics note, we're going to start kind of with a quick, about a 5-minute presentation with them talking about some of the interesting AI consumer applications they're doing, and then we're going to have a panel discussion afterwards. So with that, Julie?
Great, thank you. My name is Julie Babayan. Hi there. I am based in Washington, D.C. With the Global Government Relations and Public Policy team at Adobe. You may know Adobe from some of our most well-known products, such as Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator and Adobe Acrobat. But let me just give you a little bit more background on Adobe and how it fits into today's discussion. Adobe's business is comprised of 3 cloud-based solutions, and all of them use artificial intelligence. We have the Adobe Creative Cloud, the Adobe Document Cloud, and the Adobe Experience Cloud. And what we're talking about here is really specialized AI that's designed for specific purposes. So in the creative space, when we at Adobe think about AI, we think about it in terms of how do we use AI to help creative professionals do their jobs. And it's worth noting that we're unique in the copyright space because at Adobe, we develop AI-powered tools for creative professionals who then use those tools to create copyrightable works. And we've really built an industry on helping creative professionals express themselves, and we vigorously support the ability of creative professionals to protect their work through copyright and to realize economic value from their creative works. And AI is all part of this because it helps us deliver tools for creative professionals, and they appreciate the advantages that AI can bring to them. So for instance, graphic designers can use AI-assisted search to search for stock images on Adobe Stock. And filmmakers can review footage and have edits suggested to them. And other creative professionals can have their tools like Photoshop customized to their interests and their areas of focus and their skill level. So in all of these examples, we're talking about AI helping you do your job better. And I thought it would be helpful to take a closer look at a concrete example of how Adobe is using AI right now and the research that goes into making these innovations possible. So let me first just say that our research organization, Adobe Research, is really amazing, and we ultimately incorporate many of the insights and discoveries from Adobe Research into our products. So let me just walk you through some recent research. In this case, researchers wanted to colorize black and white photos. And there are all sorts of reasons why you might want to do this. You can gain new insights from historic photos and look at them in a new way. And this is something where, colorizing black and white photos is very tedious and time-consuming to do by hand. So actually, it's a problem that's very well suited to AI. Researchers were able to start with colored photos and then convert them into black and white photos. And that is your training data. And then basically you were able to have the AI system predict the color version given the black and white photos. So just as you and I can look at a collection of photos and gain insights and knowledge from the content, here we have the AI system that is gleaning information about the objects that are depicted here, the various components, the variations in light and shading, and shadows and how they behave. Once researchers trained these AI systems, they noticed something that was interesting, and that was that the AI on its own did a really bad job of colorizing black and white photos. And you can see from here the automatic results are mostly gray and brown. So not the greatest photos to look at. And there's some reasons for this. Some of the colors in the training data are very well defined, such as skin tones, for instance. But other colors are not well defined at all, like clothing. And ambiguity, as it turns out, is a very, very hard problem for an AI system to solve. So this gets us to Adobe's approach, which is let the artist decide. The AI gets you most of the way there, but it's ultimately the artist that's in control, and the AI is merely a tool to help the artist. So with this, you get much better photos. And this is just one example. And maybe you wanted slightly different color tones here in the clothing, or maybe here's another example as well. And I bring this up just because I think that it illustrates Adobe's approach to AI in general, which is it's ultimately about giving people useful tools and letting them decide how they're going to use them. And this is a good segue into Adobe's approach to public policy on copyright and AI. Recommendation number 1 is promote policies that expand access to data, avoid outcomes that limit access to data. AI opens up creative possibilities, but truly realizing these possibilities requires reasonably unrestrained access to data, and often including copyrighted works to train AI systems. So what would be a bad outcome is if copyright law were interpreted to limit access to data, because as we heard in our last panel, outdated and insufficient data also contributes to bias, and outdated and insufficient data also would put the US at a disadvantage as compared to other countries that have clarified their law explicitly to permit such uses, which leads me to recommendation number 2, which is harmonize international copyright laws to promote AI, and specifically continue the international trend of text and data mining exceptions. So a number of countries have grasped the importance of AI and the role that data has to play here, and they've adopted copy rules to facilitate the development of AI. These are often referred to as text and data mining exceptions, or TDM exceptions. And Japan, for instance, recently amended the Copyright Act to add exemptions. Other countries such as Singapore, Australia, China, Thailand are also looking to update their copyright laws to further facilitate machine learning. And the EU recently adopted limited TDM exceptions as well, and could be exploring further refinements in this area. So currently, the US is a world leader in AI, but the US could quickly fall behind if our policies limit access to data. And that finally leaves you, I'll leave you with this last one, which is provide guidance in the United States to enable AI to flourish. Here in the US, we do have the fair use doctrine and related case law that supports the legality of processing copyrighted material for the purposes of training AI models. But we would still recommend specific guidance to promote certainty to enable AI to flourish. And providing guidance establishing a clear right to use copyrighted materials to train AI systems is consistent with the goals of copyright law to promote the progress of science and the useful arts, and ultimately to help us encourage innovation. Thanks.
Thank you. Vanessa?
Clicker.
Clicker. Yes.
Okay, I'll wait for my slides to come up there. But good afternoon. My name is Vanessa Bailey. I am the head of IP policy for Intel Corporation. I'm based here in Washington, D.C. Do I point it at this? Oh, I did. So basically, we have a lot of really cool AI inventions that I'll show you a couple of them just to let you guys know what's going on in the tech sector and AI. But, how did we get here? What do we really need for AI to flourish? And one of the big things is data, right? So we're looking at the big data explosion, and we know that nowadays, especially amongst some young people, there's like a lot of data going through on your phones, connected vehicles, a lot of data. I have numbers up there. There's just a lot of data going through. With that, obviously, you need compute to make the data make sense, to be able to process the data. And of course, the goal here is connected devices. Looking at the different solutions, I speak on different AI panels, and usually Microsoft's up there with me, and I give them so much kudos for having Common. I don't know if you guys know who Common is, an actor, bringing AI to the masses, I say, with his, agriculture commercial, because it really does let you know, the usefulness of AI. A lot of different areas that we see AI, education, government, health. There's a lot of different health applications. Better research, quicker results. People talk about the friendly robot that you actually know, like when they give you medicine, that the robot, has a special temperament because it's programmed and you have to deal with different personalities. My mother would hate that, but, different people have different things. Looking at media, the Olympics is coming up. We have things called 3DAT, which is the 3D athletic analysis, and it's like the overlay on the athletes, and it's actually quite amazing. I didn't actually realize what it was doing until somebody says, no, you can't tell because it looks real time, but it's actually predictive, and it's actually estimating what the athlete's got to do next, and that's when the overlay is like 1 millisecond behind him, but it knows where he's going, and I'm like, wow, who knew? I thought that was, somebody sitting there trying to figure out where they're going. They go, no, that's AI. We actually have all this data in there, and we're predicting where the athlete's going, what's going to happen next, and we have an overlay on top of it. And apparently, at the Tokyo Olympics, is going to be some quite amazing things for the audience to see with that. Looking at some of the practical applications of some of our AI, we have something called TrailGuard AI, which is a part of our AI for Good program. And in that, we have partnered with, I think it's called the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation and National Geographic, to deal with the poaching problem in Africa of elephants. And so the problem statement was that there's just too much land. There's not enough bandwidth for the rangers to deal with the poachers, and apparently there's like some stat that every 15 minutes an elephant was being poached. I mean, it seems quite amazing to me that was a stat, but that's what they said it was. And we looked at, well, what can we do? What's the problem here? And the problem was that you had to manually survey your thing to see if a sensor was tripped or a camera was tripped, and you have to manually go over there. Then you make the judgment call on whether that's a person or not, and then you have to, tell the ranger to hurry up and get over there and deal with the problem. And they were missing a lot, obviously, as you can imagine. So with that, we have this thing called TrailGuard AI, which deals with the on-camera inferences, and it basically will detect whether it's, you can't read that, the fonts are off there, but it basically detects is it a human, an object, or animal, and it makes a decision based on that, and will instantly send out a ranger, no manual checking needed, and it has a very, very, very high rate of accuracy. And so that's one of our AI for Good programs. Another program that we have, which I've actually witnessed, and it's quite amazing, quite frankly, it's called Wheelie. And what it is, it uses the Intel Core chip, the RealSense camera, and the OpenVINO software, which is like computer vision, our computer vision AI product. And it helps people who are mobility impaired such that they don't have any functionality of their limbs, and they can use facial expressions to move their wheelchair. I think my next one, if we can do the video of it, just to give you a more of a sense of what it actually does. Yes.
For most, facial gestures are an easy way to show how we're feeling. But what if a smile could be used for more than just expressing emotion? With Intel AI, it can. The Wheelie is the first AI-driven program that uses facial gestures to help wheelchair users gain autonomy and feel more independent, and can be customized based on their needs. Using Intel RealSense camera sensors, the Wheelie captures a 3D map of a user's face, then uses Intel-powered deep learning to process over 10 different facial expressions, turning smiles, kisses, and raised eyebrows into real-time chair movements, while giving wheelchair users a newfound sense of mobility without lifting a finger.
And so that application is actually used, I think, at the University of Houston Hospital, and it's being used in a lot of the different Texas hospitals. One of the people helping with the training data for that is a Brazil company.
I remember loving football from day one.
That's
I
not,
wrote
yep,
this
there we go.
a long time ago.
Other different aspects of some of the AI applications are the health applications. Now people are called health engineers instead of engineers when they use AI. Using it in real-time MRI analysis of our cardiovascular issues. A lot of, it's actually used quite uniquely. I was actually, from the legal side involved in the Brainiac project, which is really cool. It's the first, Intel's first venture into open source for using AI in the neuroscience area. And it is quite an amazing project that we're still working on. One of the applications I guess a lot of people can see is our autonomous driving department, which is a very big department for us. Obviously, we acquired Mobileye, and we are heavily into autonomous driving. There's a lot of different aspects there, but from our sense of what we're good at in that area and why we're excelling is the fact that Mobileye can use all of the sensor data and everything to create a very detailed map very quickly. And we're using that for one of the examples it shows up there. I don't know if you can read that we did in Las Vegas. We went through the roads and over 248 miles, 16,000 drives, and we created a map in 24 hours, which if you think about it is quite amazing. And of course, that's using a lot of the data that uploads. Here, let me, I was gonna, oops. Yeah. If you wanna run that, I'm just gonna show you just generally while I talk what, no, there we go, yeah. What autonomous driving look like, because a lot of people have different thoughts about what it is. In CES, actually recently, Intel announced that we're actually at the autonomous driving level 5, which is quite amazing actually, because people are thinking that we're really not there. Level 5, I don't know if you know the different levels. So 0 is where there is no autonomy, where you have full control over everything in the car. Level 5 is completely autonomous. There is no driver in the driver's seat. At CES, now Intel announced we're actually at level 4, which is a great advancement because it means that then, there is a driver in the seat and he can take control over it, but all the functionality of it is there. So there's a lot of different things going on. Obviously, there's a lot of copyright things going on in that space. I tell people, generally I'm a patent person. I was a patent litigator for 24 years. And I tell them now it's really cool to be a copyright person because it's so fun. There's all this technology and there's a lot of very hard and interesting questions being asked that need to be answered, especially in the different various tech areas. There's a lot going on in AI, and there's a lot further we can go in AI, but we are really getting to a good place, I think, rather quickly. And but I think though that as far as copyright is concerned, I still think that copyright laws are still adequate. I think we're doing fine with what we have, and that smart lawyers are figuring things out. And so maybe there's not the biggest conundrum in the world that maybe everyone thinks, but maybe I'm just optimistic about everything in life. So.
So as Mark mentioned, I'm Melody Drummond Hanson, and I have the perspective on this panel of being an outside counsel. So rather than being responsible for advising primarily one company, although there are many hats for both of you within your companies and different types of products with different, potentially different competing interests, I have the pleasure of advising companies kind of across the ecosystem for AVs and connected vehicles, and hearing from them what keeps them up at night, what are their questions, what are the different technology models they're using, what are the different data models that they're using. And one of the things that I like to remind folks of, how many people here are very familiar with autonomous vehicles, follow it closely? We've got some super fans, so maybe you'll tell me if you want to correct anything. But the DARPA challenges in the United States were back in the early 2000s. 2004, you have challenges that for vehicles to drive, here off-road in this picture, with being able to do their own navigation, their own detection of obstacles and navigation of obstacles. For some of the challenges, some of them were in desert locations with, where rock is one of the biggest obstacles to the technology, and then in urban environments, which we all know create different challenges for autonomous driving. But you have back, 15 years ago, cars perfectly capable of driving themselves, navigating novel environments, sometimes without a lot of input or a lot of advanced knowledge, and that was part of the design challenge, is to create courses that would be unknown or have details only known at the last minute. And then, today I work in Silicon Valley, I live in San Francisco, and I see a lot of AVs on the road every day from different companies, and they are on the roads. To kind of echo Vanessa's point, the technology really is capable here on the roads. We may all have an experience with the lower levels of autonomy with our assisted driving techniques. For me, when I drive with my cruise control on, just regular old cruise control, I see how stupid everyone's driving is, because you start to notice when people are braking for no reason, or braking because they're going under a tunnel, or braking because they're going around a curve, or just making a dumb decision that slows everyone down. So I think there's a lot of promise, and people acknowledge the promise. And echoing Julie's point, in the latest DOT guidance on AVs called AV 4.0, they really put it in terms of we need to enable this technology so that we can remain competitive in the world, and so that we can remain a world leader. And so I think there's that recognition these days. There are a lot of diverse market players in this space. So in addition to the Waymos of the world, or the Zooks of the world, or the Cruises of the world, who are actually kind of designing around cars or designing their own cars, there are other players who may supply, only LiDAR, or only software, or only, for example, chips or data storage that are enabling this space. And all of them are potentially affected by the rules that we're making. Like Vanessa, too, I come from the patent background, so it is more fun to be in the copyright space a bit. But here is a picture of a device that's an aftermarket kit that you can add onto an existing car and make it self-driving. And there are a number of players in the space who are doing that as well. I thought it'd be helpful to have some examples of the types of data that are being collected by AVs, and this is from the New York Times, and citing Google and depicting a modified Lexus. And at number one on the top of the vehicle is the LiDAR, which is a sort of a portmanteau of light and radar. It can map, in the loose sense, an environment by shooting out light and receiving beams back. Underneath that is a camera at number two. And then on what's labeled as 4 on here is radar, to be able to detect information around you. 5 is another smaller LiDAR. And in the trunk at 3 is a big fat computer to try to analyze and deal with all this data. Terabytes and terabytes of data being generated in a single day. So what does this look like? Here's an example of LiDAR from Luminar. This is the website that it came from. But this is driving down the Embarcadero in San Francisco. And you can see it sort of picking out different objects. And in the picture that Vanessa showed, and we'll see another example of this, whether it's with cameras or with LiDAR, there is often metadata attached to that, often real time, to kind of draw boxes around different types of objects. So we need to be, as the other panelists were talking about, we need to be able to distinguish between a pedestrian and another vehicle, in addition to being able to judge distance, stop signs, and the like. And so, one of the things I joke about, folks want to ask about with AVs, how are we going to train the algorithm as to who it should kill when faced with two options? And my first response to that is always, well, you've driven a lot. How many times have you had to decide who you should kill during your daily commute? But in reality, some of the more practical, immediate problems have to do with being able to accurately detect traffic cones in different positions, navigate these types of everyday obstacles, map those, and make accurate depictions. And so you can imagine that these have a lot of questions around them in terms of, you've got a lot of video or photographs, you've got data sets that are potentially annotated with this type of metadata, either in real time or using its own AI. And folks really don't know what to do about this. They really don't have a sense of how this will be treated. And I think different market players have different perspectives on it. But to echo the point on the previous panel, the notion of having to get the rights to hundreds of thousands of photographs of traffic cones or something like that is a kind of daunting task, and yet everyone acknowledges that the industry benefits from sharing data and being able to share data about the routes that you're traveling, about the ways that you've identified obstacles, about existing routes. And there are a lot of efforts to do that these days. Waymo has released certain data sets. Lyft has released certain data sets with this type of thing. But there are a lot of questions around the rights on them. And to the extent folks are familiar with them, the data sets have different types of information in them. Some have video, some have 2D photographs. Often they have this attached metadata. And they have terms, they're called open data sets, but they have terms attached that, one of the data sets I was sort of criticized for specifying that you can't use it to train an autonomous car. So with that in mind, I'll finish up this part, and these are the practical realities of the car, not who they're going to kill. Can they drive in the snow? But that's the type of data we're talking about.
Great. Thank you, Melody. So I guess to start off, and maybe to stay on that topic for a minute, there's a lot of talk sort of in popular culture about self-driving cars and what cities will look like in 10 or 20 years. How close practically are we based on where the technology is right now?
I think we both have a lot of confidence and optimism.
Right, that's right, because I think, as we've seen, that was actually driving in Jerusalem when you saw, but it was actually, it wasn't staged, that's real driving. So I think we're pretty close to being there. The whole issue I find is not where the technology is, but where the people will be accepting of the technology, right? So when you drive in your Tesla, it's doing pretty well until, you want to get all the way over and exit at the last minute, right? And that's when everything falls apart. So, but I think we're there on the technology. We're getting better, but the whole key is data. And I wanted to echo what Melody said. I think, from an in-house perspective, when you're looking at this and everybody's asking you, well, what are we going to do about this? Because, I even say more than that. I think we need hundreds of thousands of data when, for, say, OpenVINO, which is computer vision, you gotta train your data set, and where are you gonna get the data? And when you get it, how can you not know if there's something in there that's copyrightable? And I think that we just rely on the current case law and the current cases for fair use, and just rely on the fact that, look, we're not using this for the expressive value. We've got to be able to train the data, because safety is number one in autonomous driving, and you only get safety by knowing all the variables, dealing with all the variables, and having access to what every variable can look like in different countries, right? Because when you have autonomous driving, when you have the car, right, it has the sensor data that's coming in. You might be in, say, I don't know, Jerusalem, but then you're sending it to the cloud, and the cloud is in, San Jose, California, or something like that. So you have a lot of very, things to consider, especially from the copyright perspective. But it all comes down to the fact that you need the data, but that we are, we're closer than I think a lot of people realize on autonomous driving.
Go ahead.
Oh, and then I guess sort of as a follow-up question then, what are the specific, copyright law issues that come up that may be unique or particularly specialized to the autonomous driving space?
So for me, I think that, I don't know if it's unique, but there are a lot of different aspects of ownerships, right? I think in autonomous driving, a lot of the contracts that you see are between the OEMs and the person who owns the AI model, the trained data set. From my perspective, you have different contracts with different, but for us, we have the sensors on the car, and we have the road book map, and we have we have the AI itself. So for us, when the sensing things in, a lot of copyright issues come into effect. Like, what if it saw a billboard and there's a copyright in the billboard, and now we took it in and we sent it to the cloud, and now it's fixed, and what does that mean in the law in Africa, because that's where it's sitting on the server. So you've got a lot of different international aspects to consider that make it unique and fun. You also have the aspect of then, when it comes back, you've got the trained AI model. It's going to push information back to the car to give you the green boxes and tell you where things are. But then, in some countries, the driver's trying to say that, well, we're the driver and we tell the car where we want to go from home to work, and so we want copyright and whatever it takes in from the cameras. And we're like, wow, really? Because there's a lot of different variables going on, and using at least U.S. case law, it doesn't seem that might be the right answer. And then there's just a lot of different unique variables, because you've got the information coming in, you've got the information going up, you've got the information churning in the cloud, and you've got the information coming back, and there's a myriad of different copyright aspects involved in all of that, from video to imaging to everything.
Yeah, I guess to echo that point, and I would say the questions are really, and I don't think they're unique to AVs. I think they have a lot to do with training AI and machine learning, but there are a lot of questions around data sets, and there are myriad ways that data sets are made. There are different players who are offering them. You may not have insight even to where the initial data came from if you're using other people's data, and particularly with some of the data sets that are available, I think there are a lot of questions about how will those different types of data be treated, whether it's visual data, location data, other information. Are there different ways that it'll be treated? And I'll say, there's a lot on these open data sets, because they're being made available. They have terms. The terms are variable. And I should mention, we have in the room one of the foremost open source experts, Heather Meeker, who works at my firm. I have the pleasure of working with her on a lot of issues that involve the kind of convergence of questions in copyright with specific questions related to open source as well. And so I think there are a lot of questions around that. You can ask questions. We kind of talked about this in our prep. You can ask questions at every stage of it, right? Author, infringement, and fair use. But I think a lot of the questions right now are around the default rules on fair use, because there are many in the industry, not everyone, but many in the industry who feel just in their gut, you've got to be able to use this data. But when you start to try to apply it, it may be not so clear what the reason would be.
Right. And then I guess to sort of stay on the data set training side, Julie, what kind of data sets is Adobe using for their products? Are they looking at a lot of open data sets? Are they generating their own? Kind of what's the thought process there?
Yeah, so I guess some examples of some data sets that I know of that are, and I won't speak for Adobe specifically,
Sure.
but that are out there,
Yeah.
are the types of open data, the types of data sets that we see that are image collections that universities and other research institutions put out there for research purposes. And, for instance, some of these image collections provide thumbnails or URLs, and for many researchers, these can be just tremendous resources for doing the type of research that leads to new insights and innovations.
Cool. And then another question I had is, when we spoke before when we were preparing for the panel, Vanessa, you had a really interesting point about the different ways different product groups look at either sharing or sort of maybe not wanting to share the training data that goes into a product where the product you're selling may be the fact that it is so accurate because of the data set. Could you talk a little bit about kind of different perspectives on either sharing or maybe keeping a little bit more closed the data set you use to train?
Right. So one of the things we were looking at, because we have different business units have different business needs. One of our products might need to be trained, and so we need access to data. But then on the flip side, depending on the business model, where you are in the ecosystem and the value chain, you might be looking at the fact that, well, you've collected a lot of data that someone else needs, so we need to protect it. And so there's kind of this internal, I'll call it rivalry between, we put all this effort into getting this data. This is something we want to license out on very reasonable terms, but we still want to license it out. Versus the other core AI team is like, no, everything's open source, and so open data. This is we're not using it for its expressive value. We're using it for it, to create our metadata, so that that that's a baby and not a dog. Surely, everybody should have access to the data. So there is this kind of, you've got to figure out where you are in the business model on what you advise your clients and what you advise your business units on, what they should be doing and looking out for on the legal front.
Well, I was just, on the way here, I was at the airport and I overheard a conversation. It's not uncommon in the Bay Area that it's about tech. And I overheard someone saying, oh yeah, well we have this data set and it's for facial recognition. It's really great because copyright doesn't apply to it at all. I mean, it just is like completely not what you're doing. And I thought, well, that's interesting because I'm going to a conference where a whole lot of smart people are talking all day long to try to figure out that answer. So I think, that's another area, like what you're doing with the data set. I mean, there's so many different uses of
and also, I guess it depends on closed versus open, right? So I think Adobe, and I could be completely wrong, I'm not speaking for Adobe, but I understand that they use a lot of sometimes closed data sets, so it's their own, and maybe it's more reliable, and the data in AI is only good as I guess the AI is only good as the data, right? So a lot of times we, I guess in tech, can't get our own closed data set. But if you've got a closed data set, you can be more relying upon the fact that maybe you own the copyright. Hopefully that's what they're talking about, versus needing versus needing to get a copyright. But then again, I find it, I guess, when you've got these big autonomous driving, you've got these kind of mobile applications, it's hard to have your own data. It's almost impossible to have your own data. And it's also impossible to get it from just one source. So again, to have reliable, less biased data, you have to look from different sources. And so with that comes, the issue of what are you going to do if there's one in the data set that is copyrighted and you don't know anything about it. You never know anything about it, quite honestly. I mean, how do you know?
Great. Well, I know we're already running a little late on time, and so I've been told to wrap up. So we'd like to thank you very much, Julie, Vanessa, Melody. Thank you so much for this conversation. This was very interesting.